know, we've been very focused on evidence-based policing at his direction and his guidance. That's been a main area for the agency as a whole, starting with, in our area, in the Office of Public Safety, the GIVE initiative that he's already spoken about. But we've been expanding it, and the commissioner's been encouraging us to expand that focus on evidence-based policing even more every day. So just this past September, the Municipal Police Training Council voted that the basic course, it has about a half an hour teaser on evidence-based policing and on the Crime Analysis Center, so that those young recruits that are coming out of the academy at least know some of the terminology and know what that is. So we're trying to do it even further. And as the commissioner talked about before, this year he wanted to move and expand beyond the GIVE jurisdictions and the CACs to everyone in the state, regardless of what your criminal justice practice is or area that you are, so that we can continue to move this conversation forward on evidence-based policing. So we thought it'd be good for those that are new to it entirely, maybe some that want a refresher, and some that may be in GIVE jurisdictions, to have this sort of evidence-based 101 that we talked about. And as Chuck had indicated, all of that is going to happen in this room throughout the next 3 days. Any of that evidence-based 101 stuff is all going to happen here. And of course, as Chuck usually is, I thought he was brilliant in suggesting that we have Cynthia Lum come to kick this portion of it off. I won't go too much into her bio. I know the commissioner talked about it a little bit before, and it is in your handout there. But she is one of the national leaders, she and Chris Koper, on this issue. And so we're fortunate that she's once again agreed to join us and partner with us on helping spread the message on evidence-based and share it. Quick housekeeping, there are bathrooms out here and out here. At the end, and I think Cynthia indicated throughout, there'll be opportunities for questions, and we'll follow up with that. So I will turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? I'm wearing this different type of microphone. So does this work okay? Okay, good. Well, welcome everyone to Evidence-Based Policing 101. My name is Cynthia Lum. Thank you, Joanna, for introducing me. And with us, I have Chris Koper. Is this a little bit, are you guys getting feedback on this? Is there too much feedback? It's okay. All right, with us, I have Chris Koper. Mostly I'm going to talk a little bit today, but every so often when I need a lot of help, I'm just going to turn to Chris and say, hey, Chris, take over for me. But I wanted to also just encourage everyone. This is more of a classroom style, and so you feel free to just interrupt me and ask me questions. If I don't get through everything, it's okay. It's more important that you ask questions when you think about them. So I have no problem with just stopping and taking questions as they happen, okay? First of all, I'm very excited about talking about this issue. I think evidence-based approach in policing is probably one of the most important things that law enforcement need to know today. Not for a couple of reasons. One is because we actually have a large evidence base now. There's like a large research base for all sorts of different things that the police are doing tactically. So this is not meant to be an academic exercise at all. I'm talking about the operations of policing. We have a large evidence base, much more so than, the commissioner mentioned I used to work in Baltimore City, and that was in the late 90s, and back then this evidence base was still growing. So we have a large evidence base, but more importantly, I really feel like, and I wish I had this when I was a patrol officer, there's much more now that you can use to wield to your advantage to get to the desired outcomes that you seek, whatever those outcomes might be. So I thought I would try to discuss, convince, define evidence-based policing for you today, and also to give you some examples, very specific examples of what I'm talking about when we talk about evidence-based policing. Okay. So let's start here. What is evidence-based policing? A very famous policing scholar named Larry Sherman actually wrote on this back in the late 90s. And he was saying that police practices should be based on scientific evidence about what works best. And this is how he defined evidence-based approach. The issue is, though, what does this actually mean? Okay, so what does this mean? Police practice should be based on scientific evidence about what works best. And I would say that think of it in this way. There's many things that go into decision-making in policing. Like you have laws, you have best practices, you have your own experience. Sometimes political ideology goes into policing. It's not technically supposed to, but it happens. People's emotions matter. when making decisions about policing, even kind of what we did yesterday, right? But evidence-based policing really focuses on knowledge that is derived from science. And what this means is simply systematic information on crime or organizational issues, as well as things like rigorous evaluations of tactics and strategies. The concept of evidence-based policing comes from the idea of evidence-based medicine. And that is when you all go to your doctor, that he or she should not be just using their clinical experience only to make decisions about your health care. That doctor has to keep up with the evolving knowledge of how to treat, prevent, and address illness, disease, what have you, in order to treat you best. And that doctor also should know the side effects of medication, of treatments for you as well. And so evidence-based policing comes from a very similar kind of approach, this idea that, all right, now that we have a lot more knowledge about crime, about policing, about offenders, we need to wield that information to our advantage, especially since the stakes are high. Because frankly, in policing, the stakes are as high as in medicine. Unfortunately, they're not going to pay you like doctors, so it's very sad, frankly. They should. Okay, another way that I like to think about this is, or to describe evidence-based policing, is to describe it from how evidence-based policing views your profession and how I view it, frankly. And that is that policing, to me, and this took me a little bit of while to come to a realization of this, frankly. I did not think this way in patrol. Let me just say off the bat, I was not some enlightened patrol officer with all, I was a Baltimore City patrol officer, your average officer would go around and do all, whatever Baltimore City cops do, okay? I was not some enlightened patrol officer about these things, right? But the way that evidence-based policing views policing is that it views it as an intellectual profession, and I view this too. It's like an incredibly intellectual profession. Every single thing that police do, whether your cops think this or not, requires like an incredible amount of thought, thinking around these issues of deployment, of investigations, of organizational functioning, right? It's no longer enough to guess anymore about what is going to work best for whatever you're actually doing. And in fact, many of our best guesses, by the way, have been debunked. So for example, at least, again, my experience, I started in Baltimore in 1997. And in those days, I thought that the more you arrest people, the more you're going to help your beat, right? Like arrest could actually deter crime. It could get the bad guys, this kind of thing. Well, we now have a lot of evidence that says arrest doesn't necessarily have those types of deterrent effects. Random patrol, preventative patrol. There used to be a belief that people go around preventative patrol, create omnipresence, you could help prevent crime. Well, we now know that that type of patrol deployment strategy is not very good at preventing crime. Rapid response, again, maybe this is too old-fashioned for some of you in the room, but we were taught, look, get to the call as quickly as possible. You're going to be judged on that. Someone's timing you, right? We're going to be recording your response time, right? Well, that is not connected to the deterrence, detection, prevention, or reduction of crime. So a lot of DARE is another great example of this. That does not reduce juvenile drug use. I hate to tell anybody who may not know this already, okay? So many of our best guesses, many of our best practices have been debunked. And so evidence-based policing is really about bringing another very powerful tool to the table. And that is this tool of systematic analysis, of evaluation, of testing, of empirical study to policing. And let me also say, I don't mean to sound academic. Evidence-based policing is not just about doing all that, okay? Because you could probably get a researcher to help you do some of that. The core, the crux of evidence-based policing is operationalizing what we now know is effective. That's the hard part. researchers like myself are not going to be able to help with that. We can help do the analysis, but we cannot help with the operation, the translation of it on the ground. What does this look like? An evidence-based approach includes that aspect of using science. Okay. Core of evidence-based policing. At the core of evidence-based policing is a very simple concept. And that simple concept is trying to connect actions or activities. You can fill in the blank what that means to you, okay? So it can be internal activities, it can be external activities, tactics, right? Evidence-based approach is about trying to connect those activities to some desired outcome that you seek. Forget about what I'm interested in, but that you seek in your own particular agencies. The police do so many things. They answer calls, they investigate crime, they help victims, they diffuse situations, they engage with community on all sorts of different things. Inside of the organization, you're constantly being trained on this or that or the other, right? You have new technologies that come into play. So the police are doing a lot of activities. And at the core of evidence-based policing is saying, okay, how are these activities connected to desired outcomes? Can somebody tell me, like, what do I mean by desired outcomes? What do you all want to achieve with whatever that you're doing? Just shout it out to me. It's okay. Crime reduction, yes. What else? Gun violence. Reducing gun violence, right? Yes, reducing gun violence. Yes, what else?
Better community relations.
Having better relations with people, right? What else is desired outcome? Say that one more time, sir?
Reduce calls to a particular place.
Reduce calls for service, right? And you get the same calls over and over and over again, right? So all of these, you're absolutely right? So desired outcomes, detecting, preventing, reducing, deterring crime, achieving trust and confidence. Some of the desired outcomes that you all are trying to achieve have nothing to do with crime. They're like, how do you maintain officer job satisfaction? How do you keep cops from leaving? Because there's so many other jobs that they could do nowadays. It's a different world now. People don't stay in the same job for, more than a few years. So how do you keep them in the field to make a career out of policing, right? How do you maintain the organization, keep it nimble, keep it flexible, and highly functioning? How do you maintain officer wellness, right? These are just a few examples. There's probably more. But many, many types of desired outcomes that our police are trying to achieve. And evidence-based policing is a perspective that says, okay, let's not take a guess. Let's try to figure out if this type of patrolling that we're doing, or this type of supervision, or this type of job retention strategy, or this type of, yoga class is helping with officer wellness, right? I saw somebody do yoga class for officer wellness, and I don't like yoga, so I'm sorry for those of you who do yoga, but they were doing this for officer wellness, and my question is not whether or not I like yoga or not is irrelevant. The question is, does that help them reduce their stress? You're going to spend that time to purchase yoga classes, all right? If it does, great. Let's bring in yoga class, all right? So evidence-based policing is not making a comment on whether it likes yoga or not. It's about whether or not yoga is connected to officer wellness or not, and how do you measure that? How do you connect that? To connect it involves valid testing. It involves experimentation. It involves trying to understand the causal link between the actions that you're taking and the outcomes. Sometimes police do this themselves. You probably will meet some people here from the American Society of Evidence-Based Policing. Some of those folks are cops, and they're actually doing this. They're like trying to test things out in the field, whether or not X leads to Y. But oftentimes police are doing this type of testing in collaboration with researchers. Why? Because this is what we know how to do. So oftentimes it's about finding your local, a professor at a local university who will know how to do this, who will be able to analyze some data, collect some information. Not all of it is about quantitative data. It might also be observational data or qualitative research. But this is a concept that is that comes from partnerships between researchers and practitioners. Okay. Wait a second. Chris, can I borrow your watch so I can kind of make sure I'm on time? Oh my goodness. Okay. So evidence-based policing is really about making sure that science has a seat at the table of policing, that police takes an intellectual approach to the profession, that we start building receptivity to this particular knowledge, and that we then institutionalize that knowledge into everyday practices. By the way, evidence-based policing could be about anything. Some people mistakenly associate it with like crime analysis or CompStat or community policing or problem solving. By the way, all those things can be looked at from an evidence-based policing lens, right? But it's not focused on any particular strategy. It's focused on a perspective, an approach, and an intellectual approach to the profession. Okay, before I want to give 2 examples just to get into this a little bit, but let me stop for a second and ask if anybody has a question so far about this. Maybe I can prompt some questioning by giving you a couple of examples, okay, about what I mean by this intellectual approach to the profession. And I want to start off with this example because it's like the largest part of policing. It is the most common, the most basic unit of crime reduction strategies. It's like the bulk of the deployment that happens in policing. So I want to start off with patrolling. But by the way, for the investigators in this room, you can almost think of this the same way. And I could give you an example for investigations too if you'd like to talk to me afterwards, okay? So let's talk about patrolling. And by the way, when I talk about patrolling, I mean just patrolling like when you're not answering calls for service. So yes, part of patrolling is answering calls for service, but I'm just talking about what you're doing outside of answering calls for service, okay? Somebody tell me very quickly, what's the purpose? What is the desired outcome for patrolling? Why do officers patrol? Reduce crime, definitely. What else? Show police presence. What? Say it again. Somebody said something over here. Say it again, sir.
Same thing. Crime deterrence.
Crime deterrence, right? Show presence. Any other reasons?
Provide a feeling of safety.
Provides feelings of safety. Trust and confidence of people. Like this is like an important part of patrolling, right? Why police patrol, right? So absolutely, okay? So to get to this desired outcome, right? My second question is, how do police try to achieve, how do we patrol to try to achieve crime reduction, deterrence, safety, trust, and confidence? How do we do this? Let me back up, an easier question. How were you trained to do this in your academies? Do y'all remember your academy, Patrol 101? What did they teach you? I know it's a long time ago. But what are they teaching the recruits now on how to patrol? So talk to community members, engage with them, right? Good. I'm saying physically patrol, like get into your car. How do they teach officers to patrol? So you're supposed to respond to calls for service, right? And it's very call for service centric, right? But when
Predictable.
Say that again?
Not to be predictable in your routine.
Okay, so don't be predictable, right? To kind of patrol different places, yeah? Say it again?
Cover your entire beat.
Cover your entire beat, also known as what? Yeah, or omnipresence. That's what we were taught in my academy. Like, oh, omnipresence. Like you could be everywhere at once, and or people think that you're everywhere at once, right? That creates a deterrence, right? So, okay, any other?
You were taught to be reactive.
So you're taught to like respond to calls for service, and a lot of time is spent in the academy on responding to calls for service. Okay, good. Think back now to when you were patrolling. So some of you are in patrol now, or I know all of you have patrolled in your past. What did you do in your patrol? Like, how did you physically patrol? Say that again?
I'm guessing from the car.
Yes? Yeah, no, from your car, you're getting in there. Sometimes you're on foot, right? Right? Or you're on bicycle, right? But tell me though, how do you patrol? In your car, on your bike, in your feet? Okay, like drive around, try to find out where problem spots are, right? You know yesterday that you dealt with some problem, so you're going to go back and see if that's a similar problem, yes? Does this sound familiar to everybody? Can everyone tell me, do all cops patrol the same? No, it's like, some of you are sergeants, right? If you were to ask your squad, and you were to give me a description of every single person in your squad and how they patrol, I bet you it looks something like this. Well, yeah, she does this kind of thing. She specializes in this. This guy does more traffic. This guy, he just kind of does, sits and waits, right? One member of my patrol squad used to go and, like in between calls, and visit his girlfriends on the beat in his area. And that's how he patrolled. he did hot spots of girlfriends, I guess. But everybody has different kind of a patrol strategy, right? Okay. So this is what we're at, right? Here's the catch, everyone. There's a whole science behind patrol. There's like a whole science behind it, right? And let me just give you some examples of what I mean by the science behind patrol. This includes, and by the way, when I say there's a science behind patrol, I mean that there's a specific way that officers can patrol that can maximize their ability to reduce crime, to create a deterrent effect, to increase trust and confidence, to respond to calls better, all right? There's a science to this. The first thing I put here is just simply understanding the research on deterrence and uncertainty. So, sir, you mentioned like being uncertain, right? I don't know your name. What's your first name? Kevin? So Kevin said like being uncertain. Well, there's actually research around this. I don't want to make Chris feel any, more egoistic than he is, but this is like one idea behind this is the Koper curve idea, right? This Koper curve idea goes something like this. You don't have to sit at a hotspot for 8 hours anymore. It's like that's not going to help, okay? And not only that, but you don't have the resources to do that, so forget it, okay? What helps is if you go to that hotspot in a way that people are uncertain about when you're going to come back. That's rule number 1 for creating deterrence through physical patrol. And rule number 2 is, how long do I have to stay there? Well, you don't have to stay there 8 hours. You can literally stay there for 12 to 15 minutes or so, and then you can leave. That 12 to 15 minutes optimizes what's known as your residual deterrence effect. This is like the halo effect. So after the cop leaves, there's a deterrent effect that lingers. You want to optimize that, because while you're there, well, hopefully while you're there, I don't know, Baltimore was kind of funny. You'd be standing there and people would deal drugs right in front of you, right? But most of the time, people are not going to kill someone in front of a police officer, right? What you're trying to hope for is when you leave, that residual deterrent effect will linger. That's what I mean by this, that sergeants, that officers, yeah, they're like all doing their own thing, but the science behind deterrence and uncertainty, that's like 2 powerful tools that sergeants can use to wield their patrol officers to create and optimize their deterrent effect. Okay? Another science behind patrol. When I was in the academy, we spent a lot of time on situational awareness, like don't read your book in your patrol car because someone could come up to you on your patrol car, this kind of situational awareness. Make sure when you enter a house that you know what's going on around you, that you can understand your environment, right? Very important for policing. But what's also important is locational understanding. What I mean by this is every location in which a crime occurs, the crime occurs there, and especially hotspots, occur there because there is an opportunity structure that exists in that location that contributes to crime happening there. That opportunity structure is the combination. I'm sorry if this is getting a little long-winded, but the opportunity structure is a combination of the routine activities of both legal and illegal people in that place, like people that are going to do something illegal. It's also a combination of the social and physical environment of that place. And then on top of that, it involves the opportunity structures that contribute to the crime problem at that place. Can you imagine if cops were actually taught this in the academy? It doesn't matter if you know how fast to get to your beat or if you know the street layout. They'll learn that in a couple of weeks being out on the street. What's really important for them to learn is why crime occurs at certain places as opposed to other places. That's the science I'm talking about with this bullet point. And then there's a whole area of evaluation science. I'm not asking you all to do this. This already exists, okay? There's a whole area of evaluation science that says, all right, now that we roughly know how to physically patrol, we understand the locations, what should officers be doing when they actually get physically to a location? Do they get out of their car? Will that help them increase their deterrent effect? I actually think this does. Okay, so getting out of your vehicle. When they engage with people, does that help? If they walk foot, if they do problem solving. You know, Sergeant Retigliano was talking about like changing the nature of the street, like people driving to and from. That's a manipulation of the routine activities of people that are going to come into a particular place. Okay? That is a scientific approach. So Joe, you're taking a very scientific approach, right? That's a scientific approach to patrolling. So I give you just this one example. I have another, but I'm going to skip it for now because I'm running out of time. But I'm just giving you this a single example to show you how much thinking could go into optimizing a desired outcome that folks are seeking using an activity that you're constantly involved in. This example is one of thousands. For example, I could get really specific on response to domestic violence incidents. We could talk about we could talk just about traffic enforcement if you want to. Okay, investigators in the room, we could talk about the way that you are investigating crime. When I say way, the things that you're doing one after the other, creating the case file, what you're actually involved in on a daily basis. There's a science behind that too. In fact, there used to be a belief that investigators didn't really have much influence on whether or not you resolved a crime or not. Like that the solvability factors of a case mattered more than your effort. Well, we now have science that shows that that's not true at all. The investigators matter incredibly to the clearance rates of crime, okay? Including when you have non-cooperative witnesses. They matter incredibly so. The bottom line is that I think sometimes we treat patrolling or investigation as we treat it as a craft, something left up to maybe officer discretion, and that's why when you talk to all your 7 officers in your squad, they're all doing different things. But an evidence-based policing perspective says that if you desire a particular outcome from patrol, then officers really have to think carefully about how to calibrate to the outcomes that they're desiring. Okay? It's not unstructured discretion. It's like tactical precision, tactical operations about deployment. Think about, I do not like to use military analogy because the military, it's a very different organization and function and purpose. But having said that, imagine if you were a sergeant of a squad. I'm sorry, I have not been in the military, so I may be using the wrong terms. But imagine if you had a battle that you're going out to and you just told your squad, hey, the enemy's out there somewhere, go forth, right? And in some ways, that's what where we're at in American patrolling at the moment. Okay? It's not because the sergeants want that. There's so many different reasons why we're at that situation today. And figuring out how to undo that is the key. Okay? Let me stop here before I continue. Sorry, this was my other example. But I have just 15 minutes left, so I can do a couple of things. First, I just want to stop and just want to take questions. Oh, excellent. Okay, great. Because I could talk forever. Thank you for telling me that. Okay, then what I want to do is I want to skip my second example, and I just want to give some information to you about what the evidence is. But before I get into that, does this make sense to everybody? Is this like, I mean, isn't this fascinating? Policing to me is like fascinating. I wish I treated it with more care when I was a patrol officer, because I just thought, get in my car, go East Baltimore is like you could literally go out and make arrests all day long. Drug dealing, people carrying guns, people robbing each other. You could do that all day long, all right? And I really felt like I didn't really think much of it, but now I think a lot about this, and I think about just the intellectual aspects of policing, and I feel like it's so true. There's so much to think about. Let me stop. Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
We talk about that residual deterrent effect.
Yes.
Is there any information on how long that tends to last?
Yes, Chris, we have the resident expert right here. Chris, how long does the residual deterrence effect last? You wanna hold that?
Yeah, that's actually something where we, frankly, I think we need more research on that to exactly understand how long the residual effect of any given police presence lasts. We actually are doing some stuff at this new work that we're doing with Jacksonville. In the study that I did years ago, where I came up with that 15-minute rule, it was based on observational data that had been collected from a patrol study. So they were doing patrols at hot spots, and as part of this study, they actually had trained observers going to these hot spots and recording the comings and goings of police. And they also recorded any type of crime or disorder that they saw happening at those places. And so I was able to do an analysis basically looking at what happened after the police left, like after they drove through, or if they stayed for 10 or 15 minutes, what happened after that. I was only able to follow it up through about a half an hour. So I was able to see that your likelihood of having some kind of new crime or disorder occur within the next half hour was notably less if they stayed for a little while as opposed to simply driving through. So that's where that guideline came from.
Chris, we also have evidence now about how many, like 3 stops per shift.
Right. So this kind of notion got out that 15-minute visits would be kind of an optimal way to try to patrol these spots. And there have been a number of studies now that have been done in the field where agencies have done patrol routines where they hit these hot spot like street corners and street blocks for like 10 to 15-minute visits every couple of hours. They try to do it a few times during the shift, like 2 or 3 times or a bit more. And it's worked in a number of different studies. They've shown that they've been able to reduce crime substantially at the hotspot locations doing that. But having said that, we do need more research to better understand exactly how long the residual effect of a police presence lasts. You know, how long will it be till the next crime or call happens at that location? We're actually doing something on that right now. So hope to have some better guidance that we can give police in the future. But right now, I would say try to hit those spots at least once or a couple times during the shift. Particularly if you're in a high crime jurisdiction, I think you need to hit it a couple of times, if possible, during each shift. If it's a lower crime jurisdiction, 1 time a day may be enough. I think what's important is establishing this regularity so people around the area, they know that the police are focusing on this area and that they're watching it carefully each time they come, and that they're learning about the area and the dynamics and the people. I think that's what creates the deterrent effect. So they may not know when you're coming, but they know that you are coming. Yeah. That's, I think, the sweet spot that you're trying to hit with deterrence.
Yeah, let me also say that one of the important things to note in this science is the difference between perceived risk of apprehension and apprehension itself. So what do I mean by this? Deterrence, this idea of deterrence or prevention, it's created from increasing someone's perceived risk of apprehension. the apprehension itself is almost like a failure of deterrence because the person's already committed the crime. So Dan Nagin talks about apprehension as failure of deterrence because just putting this in operational terms, I think as police, we were trained so much on the apprehension side of the coin and less on trying to understand how to heighten people's perceived risk of apprehension. And between these two things makes a lot of difference in all sorts of things, including community relationships. So for example, the stop and frisk, Baltimore City, when I was going in Baltimore City, was all stop and frisk. You could do 20, 30 stop and frisks in a shift, in an 8-hour shift, easily, okay? So I think, and also this notion of arresting for low-level crimes, we called it zero tolerance back then. Like these were our two major approaches to patrol. If you were to ask me what we did in patrol, I would say that's what I did in patrol, right? Those things are very much focused on the apprehension side of the house. Stop and frisk depends on how you do it, but they're not necessarily focused on the increased risk of apprehension side of the house. And that's where deterrence lies, okay? So for all of you, when you're thinking about creating a deployment strategy, this is the hard part about it. Because now you have 7 officers, going back to your squad, right? Can you imagine trying to get them on board with doing something like this? We worked with a group of sergeants, and the first thing I asked them was, I said, go out to your squads and find out what each members of your squad's style is, their patrol style. So they came back, and of course, every sergeant had like 7 different patrol styles, 7 different approaches, right? Okay. How do you at least move some of them? Because some officers are, frankly, they don't care. They're not going to do, they're not interested, okay? But for the ones that are, right, and the new ones that are going to be, right, how do you get them to move more towards understanding deterrence and apprehension in this way that we're talking about here, as opposed to in the more traditional ways that we all probably were trained on? Okay. Thank you, sir, for that question. Yes?
I appreciate your research that you're doing with your colleagues. I was intrigued by what you said, and I'm standing.
That's okay. I'll repeat your question. Yeah.
I appreciate the panel and some of the things that you're saying now. And I couldn't help but wonder, and I serve as a community liaison back in the community where I live.
Yeah.
But when you talk about hotspot policing, if I were to be honest, the demographics that pop up in my mind are black and brown people.
Sure.
I know it's not exclusive to them, but I know that largely that's who we're talking about.
That's right.
And it seems to me that and I like what one of the panelists talked about, looking at the symptoms that people in those communities have.
That's right.
You know, which we know is true, hypertension and all of that.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you think, as a researcher, looking at what it means to be black in America, pardon me, folks, but I'm just saying, because we're talking about a people who clearly, and I'm being very sensitive because I understand that race is a hot issue.
That's okay.
With all the
It's important to
progress
talk
we've
about.
been making in this state, I guess I'm kind of asking if your research,
Yeah.
we could look at the issue of what it means to be African American, what it means to be a person of color, especially in those areas where crime historically, you could shut it down, but next week it'll be back up.
Yeah.
And my experience has been building that trust is paramount. And so if law enforcement is predominantly white, I know it's not only, but really for that group to understand what it means to be a person of color, not that you have to be an expert about it, but how that approach and sensitivity is imperative.
So the question that the gentleman was asking was like, this hotspots approach, isn't it important also to understand what it's like to be a person of color living in poverty and constantly being stop and frisked, et cetera?
Let me make this clarification. I'm sorry to cut you.
That's okay.
Not to justify the crime, but how easy it is to get into that element.
Sure.
Or how much more you're susceptible to it.
I gotcha. No, I understand. And my response would be that if, in terms of, let's say, hotspot policing or evidence-based approach, I would have two responses. One, when I talk about the intellectual nature of policing, I also mean emotional intelligence as well, right? Officers, like some of the best officers that I knew when I was like a medium level officer. There were guys who were really good at what they did in terms of connecting with the community. And I feel like if I thought back on these folks, it's because they had a level of empathy, a level of emotional intelligence, I think, that made them understand. It didn't change the way they were going to necessarily, they're going to have to arrest somebody if they committed a crime, right? But it helped them understand the relationship, and there is one, between concentrated poverty and our communities of color. You're absolutely right that in many of these hotspots are black and brown people, right? And can you imagine the first day that I showed up in my beat, this lady said, "I'm sorry, I need an English-speaking officer." She said that, just like that. She didn't mean it with any animosity, okay? And this was somebody, my beat was 100% black. And she's like, "I'm really sorry, I need an English-speaking officer to help me on this domestic violence," right? Or I used to go to places and people think I'm a social service worker or something like this, right? Even in full uniform with a gun, right? So having that empathy is important. But also, evidence-based approach means that you have to take a systematic approach to understanding the community. I just don't think it's enough anymore to talk to people randomly on your beat. Okay, I just don't, I think it's important, and it's really something that officers have to be doing every day, but they have to take a more systematic approach in terms of understanding what the particular issue that individual is interested in, right? Whether it's, Claire talked about surveying, but I'm just talking about with your officers, if they're going to ask somebody a question on the street about what the nature of the problem is, have them do that systematically. So not just for people that they like or somebody that's easy, a community leader, but also offenders. Offenders give great information about what's happening on the street, okay? So the best answer that I can give you, systematic approach to community engagement, emotional intelligence, and I had a slide here. I don't have time to go through it, but I had a whole slide on disparity, right? Let me just say that there is disparity in I hope this is not a surprise to anybody, but there is disparity in criminal justice outcomes. That just like there is disparity in medical outcomes, there's disparity in educational outcomes, there's disparity in social service work, okay? There is disparity in our society. The disparity is caused by many different things. And I'm talking from a research, let me put on my research hat. The disparity is caused by a number of different things: historical discrimination, implicit bias, explicit bias, racial animosity, and also real offending by minority groups, okay? So it's all those things combined. The police, from an evidence-based perspective, and I want to stay on this theme, from an evidence-based perspective, police have to think in this way. Okay, if we're going to spend millions of dollars on implicit bias training, then how can we see whether or not that helps to reduce disparity in traffic stop deployment? Does this make sense, everyone? This is this level of specificity I'm talking about. If we are going to invest in procedural justice training, will that then improve the disparity that we're seeing in pedestrian stops? That's the question for evidence-based approach. And I'm sorry if this is not a strong enough answer, because your question is harder than just, it's beyond policing, frankly, okay? But that would be my response. Yes, ma'am?
Now, just building on that,
Sure.
From what this gentleman said, we've had a number of community meetings to try to build the public trust.
Yeah.
And what I heard a lot of in that meeting was driving by, not waving, not stopping, not doing foot patrol. There was a criticism of not coming out into the community on foot, not only coming by when there was a problem, not on a regular basis to check the area in any sort of, kind of deterrent way. having traffic stops where, you know, the perception certainly was, the feeling certainly was that there were, you know, a Caucasian person had one person at that stop,
Sure.
a black man had 3 officers and 3
Yep.
police
Yep.
vehicles at that stop, and
Right.
the feeling that that creates, you know, in a community.
Yeah. Let me say that the police have the hardest profession in the world regarding your question in particular. I just watched something from this woman in Baltimore. They were interviewing her in the New York Times. It was like a video. It's maybe a couple years old now because it happened after Freddie Gray. But they were interviewing her, and she basically said something like along this lines. You know, we need the police. We want them to come. We need them to harass drug dealers and, you know, people who are carrying guns. We need them to be our courage and deal with these individuals, okay? But we also don't need to be disrespected at the same time, right? Now, can you imagine that? This is the hardest. You have to be able to be strong and then not piss people off at the same time. That's like the hardest thing to do because you're going to piss someone off, right? So one thing that I think I would respond to your question about is the unstructured discretion, in my view, contributes to this problem because it's like there's no set expectation. Let me just go back to Chris. When I mean set expectation, I don't mean like to be more regular in the time you show up. I think uncertainty is an incredible and important, powerful tool in the deterrence equation, okay? What I mean is that a certainty about what the police are going to do in a particular place and how much they've told people about it, right? I think there hasn't been a lot of conversation about, hey, this is what we're actually going to do in this hot spot. What do you think about that? Or we've been doing this for a little bit. What are your thoughts on this, right? That intellectual nature of policing really requires a lot of that communication. And I feel like the unstructured discretion contributes to this a little bit. That's just my feeling about it.
Because in these meetings, you know, the police had very good answers for a lot of, you know, the philosophy behind, you know, we have problems with our budget, getting people out there, we aren't on foot, we might be on a police call, that's why we didn't stop. You know, there was a lot of explanation, but there was just a lack of communication as to why police do things the way they do them.
That's right.
And a lack of communication in how some of the things that were done has the perception of some of those actions.
And part of it is also building social capital for future problems when the police can't stop. There are times when police cannot stop. They have to be going to whatever they're doing. They will not be able to get out, right? But if there's enough, it doesn't have to be a lot, but if there's enough social capital, are all you familiar with this term, like buildup of trust enough, right? Then people may be more likely to go easy on you when you're doing something like that. Yes, sir. Question. What time is it? Okay. All right, and then we'll get the question back here. Yes.
I know you said you have a lot of data on all different types and aspects of policing. I do investigations. Is there some way we can access this in the future? Obviously,
Yes.
it's not going to take place in this room, but
Yes.
we can turn to.
Absolutely. Everything we make is free. So on our website it's the Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy. I'll give you a couple of ideas. One is the matrix, which is it's mostly about patrol, okay? One is an investigative report. Can you send me an email, clum@gmu.edu? I'll send you this full investigative report that we did that lays out what investigators in high-performing agencies that have very high levels of clearance rates are doing. This big study we did, we found out that the investigators in high-performing agencies are very different than those in agencies in which clearance rates are really low. They're like doing specific things. Have all of you investigators in the room read a book called Genocide? You have to read this book. This book is like a journalistic account of what we found in this study. It's called Genocide. It's by, the author is this woman, she has brown hair. Her name is something like that. It sounds like that. Yeah. But this book is essentially says, say that again?
Her name is Jill.
Jill Leovi. Yes, Jill Leovi. Thank you. Jill Leovi wrote this book called Ghettocide, and it's essentially about investigators who that solving crime depends on investigative effort. That's like the one line, you don't have to buy the book. That's the one line answer to that. And in our study, we lay out different types of efforts that the investigators can do to do this. So evidence-based policing matrix, that we have something called the Matrix Demonstration Project on our website. It gives something called the playbook. All of this is free. You do not have to buy any of this. We're academics, so we don't probably why we're poor and we don't make any money, but it's all free and available. There's something called the playbook, which is for patrol. It's like plays, like in a similar analogy like in football, but it's plays that an officer can do in their everyday patrol that is based off of the evidence, but that looks like an actual operation. We don't go into explaining the evidence and citations of this author and that author. It's just very operational. The case of place. So investigators in this room, can I encourage you to develop an investigative squad where your unit of investigation is not a person, it's a place. I guarantee you that this will be rewarding for you, because we have no investigative unit right now that's focused on places, and that's where the challenges are. Okay. Do we have a question up here? Yes.
Real quick.
Dan.
I'm sorry. We saw. I'm with the state police in Troop G, and we've started implementing kind of more location-based policing in smaller rural communities, particularly.
Yes.
We've seen huge benefits with that, but the social capital aspect initially, I had a lot of troopers and local police, local Gloversville, really well with us, and we've had initially kind of a
pushback.
A little pushback,
Yep.
on both sides. Okay, one was the social capital portion where people looked at as ticket revenue and ticket producing events.
Yep.
So I had to kind of rein in troopers, particularly say, hey, this is not just about tickets, this is about locations, randomizing times. I used a targeting analogy from the military, F3EAD.
That's right.
And I used that to focus on individuals within the locations itself, which worked very well for us. But looking at the social media feedback is where we saw the biggest change. From 6 months ago when we started, when tickets were easily foiled and observed what we did for activity, to reducing that. So now we're not even publicizing the ticket per se or the arrest, but more of the proximity and the positive feedback from the community.
Dan, okay, so let me I'll say what you just said in 20 seconds. Dan does State Patrol. He was applying a place-based approach to rural highways and communities on State Patrol. There's a guy named Ken Cleary. Do you guys know this name? Ken Cleary. He works for Iowa State Patrol. This guy is visionary, okay? And he's a captain in Iowa State Patrol. They have a problem with fatalities on the roadways, right? So he developed this place-based approach where instead of looking at a small hotspot, it was more about the range of places where the fatality would occur and where it got started, like the bar, the whatever, right? So their troopers started going to the small towns and showing up in these towns that were the hot spots of problems starting, right? They started showing up and people were like, what are you doing here? They had never seen a trooper in some of these small towns before, right? So this guy, Captain Clary, started building this place-based approach around the activity space of these fatal accidents. And that helped reduce fatal accidents. I mean, it's like focusing on the right location. And let me add something on top of that, Dan, what you remind me of. What they also did was a non-punitive approach. So they actually didn't set out tickets. They didn't do tickets. They stopped people, They talked to them. They told them what was the issue, why they were there. They would show up in the bar and hand out things around like don't drive drunk, stuff like that. And there was backlash. Can you all imagine who gave them the biggest backlash? It actually made it to the governor's office, this complaint. The people selling the alcohol. They were like, why are you telling people to stop after 2 drinks, right? Because this is like lowering their revenues. So he took that as a win. So, you can't win them all. But in his approach, it helped to reduce the amount of punitive approach to traffic. By the way, I didn't have a chance to talk about proactivity, but some of our empirical work that we have done, traffic is like the most traffic citations is the most common approach to proactivity. It's probably not, it's like it's used for everything. Like cops will use traffic to reduce traffic problems, but they'll try to use it for all sorts of other types of proactivity. It doesn't the evidence-based approach is to say, does it actually lead to the desired outcome that you're seeking? Some of our studies show that it doesn't necessarily do that you could be doing other things, like problem solving, getting out of your car, doing some talking to people or something like this, and you could get a similar deterrent effect, all right? I'm sorry.
I was just saying, the playbook has a lot of different crimes and things in there too.
Yes.
That for those that have different types of issues, right?
That's right. So the playbook has like burglary, for example. We now know that if a place gets burglarized, a place nearby will probably get burglarized soon. There's like a lot of evidence about this, right? So the playbook has a play for burglary, has something for auto theft from auto, stuff like that, okay? So I'm sorry that I didn't get through everything, but I feel like I just needed to get across what this concept is. And I hope I interested you in some of this. Johanna, you said that there's going to be a room. If anybody wants to talk to us afterwards, I didn't even get to my 6 principles of good crime prevention, but it's okay.
We'll see it on the website.
You'll see it. You can get all of this stuff at places and just talk to me. Like send me an email and I'll send you stuff. So, feel free to send us things, okay? Thank you, everyone.
Everyone, if we could just give a round of applause to Cynthia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.